The single millionaire needed a wife to inherit the fortune, and the poor woman, desperate to save her family, accepted the deal without knowing that love was waiting for her. The shrill ring of her cell phone cut through the silence of the small apartment in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Olivia Mason, 28, woke up startled, her heart racing in her chest. She glanced at the digital clock on the bedside table. 3:17 a.m. Nothing good could come of a phone call at that time. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone. "Hello?" Her voice came out hoarse and hesitant. "Miss Mason?" The voice on the other end was deep and formal. "This is Hartford Hospital. I'm sorry to inform you, but your mother has suffered a serious heart attack. She's in critical condition in the ICU." Olivia's world fell apart in that instant. Her mother, Ellen, was all she had. Since her father had died in a car accident 5 years ago, they had become even closer, facing financial and emotional difficulties together. "I'm coming over," Olivia said, already jumping out of bed and frantically searching for clothes in the tiny closet. 20 minutes later, she was running through the aseptic corridors of the hospital, the smell of disinfectant burning her nostrils. A middle-aged doctor with deep circles under his eyes greeted her at the ICU entrance. "Miss Mason, I'm Dr. Richards," he said, his tone compassionate but direct. "Your mother needs emergency heart surgery. Without it, the chances are slim." Olivia felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. "Then do the surgery," she exclaimed. Dr. Richards hesitated, averting his gaze. "The problem is that your mother's insurance doesn't cover this procedure, and the cost is substantial." "How much?" Olivia asked, dreading the answer. $200,000. The figure hit Olivia like a punch in the gut. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. As a waitress in a local cafe, she could barely pay her rent and basic bills. "There must be something we can do," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Please, she's my mother." Dr. Richards placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry. We'll do our best to stabilize her, but without the surgery." The next few hours passed in a blur of bitter coffee from the hospital machine, desperate calls to friends and acquaintances, and stolen moments at the bedside of her unconscious mother. Olivia felt herself sinking into a pit of despair. Then her cell phone rang again, an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, exhausted. "Miss Mason?" A male voice, smooth and articulate. "My name is Alexander Blackwell. I believe we may have a mutually beneficial arrangement." Olivia frowned, confused. "Excuse me, who are you?" "I'm the CEO of Blackwell Industries. I just found out about your mother's situation through contacts at the hospital." Olivia's heart raced. Blackwell Industries was one of the largest technology companies in the country. What could its CEO possibly want with her? "Miss Mason, I'll come straight to the point," Alexander continued. "I'm willing to pay for your mother's surgery, all costs, with no debt to you." Olivia caught her breath. "But why? What do you want in return?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Marry me." The world seemed to stop. Olivia was sure she had heard wrong. "What? It's a business proposal, Miss Mason," Alexander explained, his voice calm and controlled. "I need a wife to fulfill a clause in my inheritance contract. You need money to save your mother. We can solve each other's problems." Olivia's mind spun. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life, only in cheap novels or melodramatic soap operas. I don't even know you," she stammered. "And you don't have to," Alexander replied. "It will be a marriage of convenience. After a year, we'll divorce discreetly. You'll get a generous pension, and your mother will have the surgery she needs now." Olivia looked at her mother's pale face, at the tubes and monitors that kept her alive. What were her own dreams and desires compared to the life of the woman who had raised her, who had sacrificed everything for her? If I accept," Olivia said, her voice trembling, "when would we need to get married?" "Today," Alexander answered without hesitation. "I have a shareholders meeting in 3 days. I need to present a wife by then." Olivia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision on her shoulders. It was crazy, It was risky. It was the only chance to save her mother. "All right," she whispered. "I accept." "Excellent," Alexander said, no emotion in his voice. "I'll send my lawyer with the papers in an hour. Your mother's surgery will be scheduled immediately." The call ended, leaving Olivia in a deafening silence. She looked at her mother again, tears blurring her vision. "It's going to be okay, Mom," she murmured, holding Ellen's cold hand. "I promise." 2 hours later, in a cold, impersonal room at the local registry office, Olivia signed the marriage papers. Next to her, Alexander Blackwell, tall, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, with piercing blue eyes and perfectly groomed brown hair, signed his name with an expensive-looking pen. There was no kiss, no hug, not even a handshake. Just a brief nod from Alexander before he quickly left, already talking on the phone about some important business. Olivia stood still, staring at the simple ring on his finger. In just a few hours, her life had changed completely. She was now Mrs. Blackwell, the wife of one of the richest and most powerful men in the country. But as she walked back to the hospital, anxious to see her mother being prepared for the surgery that would save her life, Olivia had no idea that this arrangement of convenience was about to turn into something much more complicated and much deeper than she could ever have imagined. The soft, steady sound of heart monitors filled the hospital room. Olivia was sitting by the bedside of her mother, Ellen, holding her hand gently. The surgery had been a success, and now it was only a matter of time before Ellen woke up. As she watched her mother's serene face, Olivia couldn't stop her mind from wandering back to the surreal events of the last 48 hours. She looked at the wedding ring on her finger, a constant reminder of the agreement she had made. Married. She was married to a man she barely knew. A soft knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. She turned to see an elegant, middle-aged woman standing in the doorway, holding a leather briefcase. "Miss Blackwell?" the woman asked, her voice professional but kind. "I'm Vivian Rhodes, Mr. Blackwell's personal assistant. May I come in?" Olivia nodded, still not used to her new surname. Vivian entered, her high heels making a soft sound on the hospital floor. "Mr. Blackwell asked me to come personally and brief you on the next steps," Vivian explained, taking a seat in the chair next to Olivia. "First, I'd like to know how your mother is." She's fine," Olivia replied, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "The doctors say the surgery was a success. Now we just have to wait for her to wake up." Vivian smiled gently. "That's great to hear. Mr. Blackwell will be pleased to hear it." She opened her briefcase, taking out some documents. "Now, about your new situation. Mr. Blackwell has prepared an apartment for you on Manhattan's Upper East Side. As soon as your mother is stable enough to be transferred, the two of you will move in." Olivia blinked in surprise. "Manhattan? But what about my job, my apartment in Bridgeport?" "Everything has already been taken care of," Vivian assured her. "Your lease will be terminated without penalty, and your belongings will be packed up and transferred to the new apartment. As for your job, well, as the new Mrs. Blackwell, you'll be expected to take on certain social and philanthropic responsibilities." Olivia's head was spinning. Everything was happening so fast. What kind of responsibilities? Vivian began to list a series of charity events, business dinners and public appearances that Olivia was expected to attend. It was a completely different world from what she was used to. "Don't worry," Vivian said, noticing Olivia's overwhelmed expression. "I'll be here to guide you through it all. We've also hired a personal stylist and an etiquette coach to help you adapt to your new position." Olivia swallowed, feeling completely out of her depth. And Alex, you mean Mr. Blackwell?" Vivian smiled, a touch of sympathy in her eyes. "Mr. Blackwell is a very busy man, but he will do his best to keep up the appearances necessary for your agreement. You'll have to attend some important events together, of course." At that moment, a soft moan came from the bed. Olivia turned quickly to see her mother blinking slowly, her eyes adjusting to the light in the room. "Mom!" Olivia exclaimed, tears of relief running down her cheeks. Ellen looked around, confused. "Olivia," What happened? Olivia gently explained about the heart attack and the surgery, omitting for the moment the details about her sudden marriage. Ellen listened, still a little groggy from the medication. But how could we afford it? Ellen asked, her voice weak. Olivia hesitated, glancing at Vivian, who nodded discreetly and left the room to give them privacy. Mom, there's something I need to tell you, Olivia began, her heart racing. I got married. Ellen blinked, surprised. Married? But to whom? When? Olivia took a deep breath and began to explain everything. The phone call in the middle of the night, Alexander's proposal, the deal she had made. Ellen listened in silence, her eyes growing wider and wider as the story unfolded. Oh, Olivia, Ellen sighed when she had finished. You shouldn't have done that, not for me. I'd do it all over again, Olivia said firmly, holding her mother's hand. Your life is more important than anything. Ellen shook her head, tears in her eyes. But what about your life, your dreams? You don't even know this man. It'll be fine, Olivia assured her, trying to sound more confident than she felt. It's only for a year, and then we'll see. At that moment, the bedroom door opened again. Olivia turned around, expecting to see Vivian, but instead saw Alexander Blackwell himself entering the room. He was impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, his bearing commanding immediate attention. Mrs. Mason, he said, addressing Ellen with a polite smile. I'm glad to see you're awake. How are you feeling? Ellen looked at him, then at Olivia, clearly connecting the dots. Better, thanks, she replied cautiously. You must be Alexander Blackwell, he introduced himself, holding out his hand to Ellen. Your son-in-law. The air in the room became tense. Olivia watched her mother shake Alexander's hand, noticing how Ellen examined him with her mother's critical eyes. Well, Mr. Blackwell, Ellen finally said, it seems we have a lot to discuss. Alexander nodded, his face a mask of professional calm. Certainly, but first, let me assure you that you will receive the best medical care available. I've already arranged for you to be transferred to a private hospital in Manhattan as soon as you're stable enough for the trip. Ellen frowned. Manhattan? But our life is here in Bridgeport. Mom, Olivia interjected softly, there are some changes we need to discuss. Over the next few minutes, Olivia and Alexander explained the arrangements to Ellen. Ellen's expression alternated between concern, disbelief, and, occasionally, a hint of reluctant admiration for the efficiency with which everything had been organized. This is all very generous, Ellen finally said, looking directly at Alexander. But what exactly do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Blackwell? Alexander met her gaze without hesitation. Frankness. I like that. The truth is, Mrs. Mason, I need a wife to fulfill certain family and business expectations. Your daughter has agreed to play this role for a year. In return, she and you will be guaranteed financial security. Ellen shook her head, clearly not entirely convinced. What about her feelings? Her future? Have you considered that? Mom, Olivia interrupted, feeling uncomfortable. It was my choice. It's all right, Olivia, Alexander said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He turned to Ellen. Mrs. Mason, I understand your concern. I assure you that I have no intention of jeopardizing Olivia's future. In fact, this arrangement could open many doors for her, if she so wishes. Silence hung in the room for a moment. Finally, Ellen sighed. Well, I guess I don't have much choice but to accept that, do I? But let me make one thing clear, Mr. Blackwell. If you hurt my daughter in any way— Mom, Olivia exclaimed, mortified. But Alexander only smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time since Olivia had met him. Understood, Mrs. Mason. I respect a mother who protects her daughter. He turned to Olivia. I need to go now. There are a few things we need to discuss, but that can wait until your mother is settled in Manhattan. Vivian will take care of everything until then. Olivia nodded, feeling a little dizzy with everything that was happening. Thank you, Alex. I mean, Mr. Blackwell. Alexander is fine, he said, his tone softening slightly. After all, you're my wife now. With a final nod to Ellen, Alexander left the room, leaving mother and daughter to process everything that had happened. Olivia sank into the chair next to her mother's bed, feeling the weight of her new reality. She had entered into this agreement to save her mother's life, but now she realized that it was only the beginning. A new world was opening up before her, a world of wealth, expectations and complications that she could barely imagine. As Ellen rested, Olivia looked out of the hospital window, watching the sun set over Bridgeport. Tomorrow, she would wake up as Olivia Blackwell, wife of one of the most powerful men in New York. What this new day would bring, she didn't know. But one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same. The sound of the city never really stops in New York. Even at 3 in the morning, Olivia could hear the distant hum of traffic and the occasional sound of sirens outside. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window of her new apartment on the Upper East Side, looking out at the twinkling lights of the city that never sleeps. It had been a week since she and her mother had moved to Manhattan. Ellen was recovering well in the luxurious private hospital, surrounded by a top-notch medical team. As for Olivia, well, she was still trying to process the drastic change in her life. The apartment was stunning, occupying the entire top floor of an elegant building overlooking Central Park. It was bigger than the entire house Olivia had grown up in Bridgeport, decorated with impeccable taste that screamed old money. Olivia felt like an intruder in her own home. A soft knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning away from the window. Vivian entered, perfectly groomed despite the late hour. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late, Mrs. Blackwell, but we have a busy day tomorrow, and I wanted to confirm a few details with you." Olivia nodded, trying to suppress a yawn. Over the last few days, her life had been an endless series of appointments, sessions with the stylist, etiquette classes, meetings with event planners. It was exhausting and often disconcerting. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., you have a benefit lunch for the New York Foundation for the Arts," Vivian began, consulting her tablet. "At 2 p.m., there's a photo shoot for Vanity Fair magazine. They're doing a story on the new powers of Manhattan, and you and Alexander have been selected for the cover." Olivia felt her stomach contract. A photo shoot? With Alexander? They had barely seen each other since their wedding, apart from a few carefully orchestrated public appearances. "Vivian," Olivia interrupted softly, Do you think I'm doing this right? I mean, being Mrs. Blackwell." Vivian paused, looking at Olivia with a mixture of sympathy and appraisal. "You're doing admirably well, considering the circumstances," she said at last. "But if I may be frank, there are still adjustments to be made." Olivia nodded, grateful for the honesty. "What kind of adjustments?" "Well, for example, your posture," Vivian said, gesturing for Olivia to straighten up. "You have a tendency to shrink, as if you're trying to take up less space. As Alexander Blackwell's wife, you need to command respect as soon as you enter a room." Olivia tried to straighten up, feeling uncomfortable. It all seems so fake. I'm not that person, Vivian. I'm not a socialite or a trophy wife." Vivian sighed, her face softening. "Olivia? Can I call you Olivia? Look, I understand. I really do. But you need to understand something. In this world, appearances matter. A lot. And now, like it or not, you and Alexander are in the spotlight." Olivia walked over to the sofa and sat down, feeling the weight of her words. "It's just that sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if it's worth it." Vivian sat down next to her, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Your mother is alive because of your decision. Isn't that worth it?" Olivia nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, of course it is. It's a lot to process, you know." "I know," Vivian said softly, "but you're stronger than you think, Olivia, and if I may say so, I think you can do very well in this position, if you give yourself a chance." Olivia looked at her in surprise. What do you mean? Well, think about it. You have access to resources and connections that most people can only dream of. Why not use that to make a difference? There are so many causes you could support, so many lives you could impact. Vivian's words ignited a spark in Olivia. She had never thought of it like that before. Maybe there was a greater purpose to it all. Thank you, Vivian, Olivia said, feeling a little lighter. I think I needed to hear that. Vivian smiled and stood up. Well, you'd better get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. After Vivian left, Olivia went back to the window, looking out over the city. Perhaps it was time to stop feeling like an imposter and start embracing this new life, not just for appearances' sake, but for the good it could do. The next morning, Olivia woke up to the sound of her phone ringing. It was Alexander. Good morning, Olivia. His voice sounded clear and professional on the other end of the line. I hope I didn't wake you. No, I was already awake, Olivia lied, trying to sound more alert than she felt. Good. Listen, about the photo shoot this afternoon. I think it would be good if we could meet beforehand to line things up. Can we have lunch together after your charity event? Olivia was surprised. It was the first time Alexander had suggested they spend time together outside of obligatory public appearances. Sure, she replied, trying to keep her voice neutral. Where do you want to meet? How about Le Bernardin? It's close to the photo shoot. I'll make a reservation for 1 p.m. After confirming the details, Olivia hung up, feeling a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. What did Alexander want to discuss? The charity lunch passed in a blur of smiles, handshakes, and superficial conversations. Olivia was surprised to realize that she was becoming more comfortable in these situations. Vivian's etiquette lessons and advice were having an effect. When she arrived at Le Bernardin, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, Olivia was immediately ushered to a discreet table at the back. Alexander was already there, wearing an impeccable suit, as always. Olivia, he stood up to greet her, kissing her cheek lightly to keep up appearances. You look stunning. She blushed slightly, still not used to such gestures. Thank you, Alexander. You look very well yourself. They sat down and placed their orders. There was a moment of uncomfortable silence before Alexander spoke. Olivia, I want to discuss something important with you, he began, his tone serious. As you know, today's photo shoot is for a very important article in Vanity Fair. They'll want to know more about our relationship. Olivia felt her stomach clench. What exactly are they going to ask? Alexander sighed. Everything. How we met, how we proposed, our plans for the future. We need to align our history. Olivia nodded slowly. So, what are we going to say? I thought we could say that we met through philanthropic work, that you were organizing a charity event in Bridgeport, and I was there as a donor. We got close, started meeting discreetly, and, well, the rest is history. Olivia listened, feeling a twinge of sadness. It was a beautiful story, romantic even, but it was all a lie. What about the marriage proposal? She asked softly. Alexander hesitated for a moment. We could say it was during a boat trip on the Long Island Sound, at sunset. Olivia couldn't help but smile wryly. You've really thought of everything, haven't you? Alexander looked her in the eye, his face serious. Olivia, I know this isn't ideal. I know it's not what you dreamed for your life, but we need to make this work. For both our sakes. She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I know. And I'm going to do my part, Alexander. I promise. He seemed to relax a little. And I want you to know that I appreciate everything you're doing. It's not easy. I know. There was a moment of silent understanding between them. For a brief moment, Olivia saw beyond the facade of the cold, calculating businessman. She saw a man who was also trapped in this situation, carrying his own burdens. The rest of lunch passed with them discussing more details of their love story. When they had finished, they both felt better prepared to face the photo shoot and interview. As they left the restaurant, Alexander offered Olivia his arm. She took it, feeling strangely comfortable with the gesture. Ready? He asked, looking at her. Olivia took a deep breath and nodded. Ready. As they walked together to the studio, Olivia couldn't help thinking about how her life had changed. Just a few weeks ago, she was a waitress in Bridgeport, worrying about overdue bills. Now, she was about to appear on the cover of Vanity Fair as the new Mrs. Blackwell. Life certainly had a strange sense of humor. But as she walked into the studio alongside Alexander, Olivia made a silent promise to herself. She would make the best of this situation, not just for the sake of appearances or the deal, but for herself. Maybe, just maybe, she could turn this marriage of convenience into something meaningful. Not necessarily a romantic fairy tale, but something that could make a difference. To her mother, and, perhaps, to the world around her. With that thought in mind, Olivia straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin and walked into the studio, ready to face the cameras and whatever the future held for her, as Olivia Blackwell. The flash of the cameras was blinding. Olivia blinked rapidly, trying to keep a smile on her face as she posed next to Alexander. The photo shoot for Vanity Fair was in full swing, and she felt like she was in a surreal dream. "Perfect," exclaimed the photographer, a slender man with thick-rimmed glasses. "Now, Mr. Blackwell, how about putting your arm around your wife's waist? We want to capture that newlywed intimacy." Alexander obeyed, pulling Olivia closer. She felt the warmth of his body against hers, the light scent of his expensive cologne. It was the first time they had been so physically close, and Olivia couldn't help the wave of nervousness that ran through her. "Relax," Alexander murmured in her ear, low enough for only her to hear. "You're doing great." Olivia nodded subtly, forcing herself to relax in his arms. A few more flashes, a few more poses, and finally the photographer announced that they had finished. "You make a beautiful couple," commented the makeup artist as she touched up Olivia's lipstick for the interview that was to follow. "So in love," Olivia smiled politely, feeling a twinge of guilt. If only she had known. The interview was conducted by an elegant journalist called Cassandra, who welcomed them with a sharp smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So, Alexander, Olivia," she began, crossing her legs and turning on her tape recorder, "tell me about the day you met. Was it love at first sight?" Alexander laughed softly, playing the part of the smitten husband perfectly. "Well, Cassandra, I'd say it was more like a spark at first sight. Olivia was organizing a charity event in Bridgeport, and I was there as a donor. She caught my eye immediately, not just for her beauty, but for her passion for the work she was doing." Olivia felt Cassandra's gaze on her and realized it was her cue. "Alexander impressed me with his generosity," she said, surprising herself with how easily the words came out. "But it was only later, when we talked more, that I realized how compassionate and dedicated he really was." The interview continued, with Alexander and Olivia carefully weaving the tapestry of their false love story. Olivia was surprised at how naturally the lies flowed, and how easily she and Alexander complemented each other. However, as the interview progressed, Cassandra began to ask more incisive questions. "Olivia, it must have been quite a change for you," she commented, her eyes shining with a curiosity that bordered on malice. "From a waitress in Bridgeport to the wife of one of the richest men in New York. How are you coping with this transition?" Olivia felt Alexander tense slightly next to her. Clearly, the journalist had done her homework. "It's been quite a journey," Olivia answered carefully. "But you know, Cassandra, wealth doesn't define a person. What attracted me to Alexander was his character, not his bankroll. And as for the transition, well, I'm focused on using this new platform to make a difference, to help people like the ones I grew up with in Bridgeport." Alexander subtly squeezed her hand, a gesture of approval that didn't go unnoticed by Cassandra. "Fascinating," the journalist murmured. "And you, Alexander. What attracted you to Olivia? It must surely have come as a surprise to many to see you marry so quickly." There was an almost imperceptible pause before Alexander answered. "What attracted me to Olivia was her authenticity," he said, his voice charged with an emotion Olivia had never heard before. "In a world where people often wear masks, Olivia is refreshingly real. She challenges me, inspires me to be a better person. As for the speed of our marriage, Well, when you find the right person, why wait? Olivia looked at him, genuinely surprised by the sincerity in his voice. For a moment, she almost believed the story they were telling. The interview continued for a few more minutes before Cassandra finally turned off the recorder. Well, that was enlightening, she said, her tone suggesting that perhaps she didn't entirely believe their story. Thank you for your time. As soon as they left the studio, Olivia let out a sigh she didn't even know she was holding. That was intense, she muttered. Alexander nodded, his face returning to its usual serious expression. You did very well, Olivia, especially with that question about the transition. It was impressive. Olivia felt an unexpected warmth at the compliment. Thank you. You weren't bad yourself. They walked in silence for a few moments before Alexander spoke again. About what you said, using this platform to make a difference. Did you mean it? Olivia stopped, looking at him in surprise. Yes, I did. Why? Alexander seemed to consider something for a moment. I have a proposal for you. The Blackwell Foundation is planning to launch a new education initiative in underprivileged communities. I'd like you to lead the project. Olivia blinked, stunned. Me? But I don't have any experience with this kind of thing. You have passion, Olivia, and perspective. You come from one of these communities. You know what they really need. With the right guidance, I believe you could do an incredible job. Olivia felt a wave of emotion run through her. This was exactly the kind of thing she had hoped to be able to do. I'd love to... Alexander, thank you for trusting me with it. He nodded, a small smile appearing on his lips. Good. I'll arrange a meeting with the foundation team for next week. In the meantime, how about dinner? We can discuss your initial ideas. Olivia agreed, feeling suddenly energized. As they walked together to a nearby restaurant, she couldn't help thinking about how things were changing. Perhaps this marriage of convenience could turn into something more, not necessarily a romance, but a partnership with purpose. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. For the first time since they had met, Olivia and Alexander had a genuine conversation, discussing their visions for the educational project and sharing stories from their lives. You know, Olivia said as she savored her dessert, I think this is the first time we've really talked. I mean, apart from planning public appearances and making up our love story. Alexander laughed softly, a sound that Olivia realized she liked. You're right, it is nice. There was a moment of comfortable silence between them before Alexander spoke again, his tone more serious. Olivia, there's something I need to tell you about the real reason behind this wedding. Olivia felt her heart racing. What do you mean? Alexander sighed, running his hand through his hair in an unusually vulnerable gesture. The truth is that my father, before he died, put a clause in his will. In order to inherit the family business and keep control of it, I had to get married before my 35th birthday. Olivia stared at him, processing the information. And when is your birthday? In 3 months. Time, he replied softly. Olivia felt a wave of understanding wash over her. So that's why you proposed this deal so suddenly. You were running out of time. Alexander nodded, looking genuinely sorry. I know I should have told you before, but I was afraid that if you knew all the details, you might refuse. Olivia was silent for a moment, digesting everything. Part of her wanted to be angry that he had kept it from her. But another part understood the desperation she must have felt. Why are you telling me this now? She finally asked. Alexander looked her in the eye, his expression serious. Because if we're going to work together on this foundation project, if we're going to be real partners, even if only for a year, I believe we need to be honest with each other. You deserve to know the whole truth. Olivia nodded slowly, appreciating his honesty. Thank you for telling me, Alexander. I appreciate your candor. He smiled slightly, looking relieved. So, you still want to lead the foundation project? Olivia smiled back, feeling a new determination growing inside her. More than ever, let's do something really good with this situation, Alexander. As they finished dinner and went out into the Manhattan night, Olivia felt as if a new chapter was beginning, a chapter of honesty, purpose, and, perhaps, a truer partnership than she had ever imagined. Looking at Alexander, she saw not just the cold businessman she had met weeks ago, but a complex man with his own struggles and vulnerabilities. And for the first time since all this madness began, Olivia felt that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work, not just as a business deal, but as a real team. With the city glowing around them and an uncertain but full of possibilities future ahead, Olivia and Alexander walked together, ready to face whatever came next. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Olivia's office at the Blackwell Foundation headquarters. It had been almost a month since she had taken over the leadership of the educational project, and the weeks had passed in a whirlwind of meetings, research, and planning. Olivia looked at the wall covered in post-its and diagrams, each one representing an idea or a challenge for the program. Her laptop was open, displaying a half-written email to a potential community partner in Bridgeport. A soft knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning to see who it was. Alexander entered, looking as impeccable as ever in his gray suit. But there was something different about his countenance, a tension Olivia wasn't used to seeing. "Good morning, Olivia," he said, his tone formal, but with a note of concern. "We have a problem." Olivia frowned, feeling a tightness in her stomach. "What happened?" Alexander sighed, handing her a folder. "The council is questioning the project's budget. They think it's excessive." Olivia opened the folder, her eyes quickly scanning the numbers. "But this is the minimum we need to make a real impact. Cutting it would mean compromising the whole program." "I know," Alexander said, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that Olivia had begun to recognize as a sign of frustration. "But they're worried about the return on investment. We need to convince them that it's worth it." Olivia felt a wave of determination wash through her. "Then let's convince them. When's the next board meeting?" "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., Alexander replied, a slight smile forming on his lips. "Do you have a plan?" Olivia nodded, already formulating ideas. "I'm going to need your help, and a few extra hours tonight." Alexander arched an eyebrow. "Working dinner at the apartment?" "Perfect," Olivia agreed, already turning to her laptop to begin preparations. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and frantic research. When Olivia finally arrived at the apartment that evening, carrying a pile of papers and her laptop, she found Alexander already there, the dining room table covered in documents. "I brought Chinese food," he said, pointing to the takeout boxes in the kitchen. "I thought we'd need some energy." Olivia smiled, genuinely grateful. "You're a lifesaver, Alexander." They spent the next few hours immersed in work, discussing strategies, reviewing figures, and refining the presentation. As the evening progressed, Olivia found herself increasingly impressed by Alexander's acumen and his dedication to the project. "You know," she said, stretching after hours bent over her laptop, "when we first met, I never imagined we'd work so well together." Alexander looked at her, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "Neither did I. You continue to amaze me, Olivia." There was a moment of silence between them, charged with something Olivia couldn't name. She sniffled, breaking the moment. "I think we're ready for tomorrow." Alexander nodded, closing his laptop. "I agree. You've done an incredible job, Olivia. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that." Olivia felt a warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. "Thank you, Alexander. That means a lot." The next morning, Olivia found herself standing in front of the Blackwell Foundation board, a dozen serious faces staring at her. Alexander was sitting at the head of the table, his face a mask of professional neutrality. Taking a deep breath, Olivia began her presentation. She spoke passionately about the impact the program could have, presented hard data about the long-term benefits of investing in education, and shared personal stories from her own experience growing up in Bridgeport. As she spoke, Olivia could feel the atmosphere in the room changing. Skeptical looks were replaced by expressions of interest and, in some cases, even enthusiasm. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before the questions began. Olivia answered them confidently, relying on the data and the thorough preparation she and Alexander had done. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the chairman of the board spoke. "Well, Mrs. Blackwell, I must say I'm impressed. Your passion for this project is evident, and your arguments are convincing." He turned to Alexander. "What do you think, Alexander?" "This is a significant investment." All eyes turned to Alexander, and Olivia felt her heart racing. This was the moment of truth. Alexander looked directly at Olivia, a small smile on his lips. "I fully support this project and the proposed budget." Olivia has demonstrated not only the value of the investment, but also her ability to lead this initiative. "I believe that this program will not only benefit countless communities, but will also solidify the Blackwell Foundation's position as a leader in corporate social responsibility." Relief flooded Olivia, and she had to struggle to maintain her professional composure. After a few more discussions, the board voted unanimously to approve the project budget. When the meeting ended, Olivia could barely contain her emotion. In the corridor outside the meeting room, away from the eyes of the board, Alexander surprised her by pulling her into a hug. "You were amazing in there," he murmured. Olivia returned the hug, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied softly. When they parted, there was something different in Alexander's eyes, a warmth, an admiration that Olivia had never seen before. For a moment, she wondered if he was going to kiss her. But the moment passed, and Alexander huffed, resuming his professional posture. "Well, I think that deserves a celebration. How about dinner out tonight?" Olivia smiled, ignoring the small twinge of disappointment she felt. "Sounds great." That evening, sitting in an elegant restaurant overlooking Central Park, Olivia couldn't help but reflect on how her life had changed. Just a few months ago, she was a waitress struggling to make ends meet. Now, she was leading a multi-million-dollar project that could change the lives of thousands of children. "A penny for your thoughts," Alexander said, snapping her out of her reverie. Olivia smiled, raising her glass of champagne. "I was thinking about how unpredictable life is. If someone had told me 6 months ago that I would be here today, I would have laughed." Alexander returned the smile, something soft in his eyes. "I'm glad you're here, Olivia. You've brought something to my life that I didn't know was missing." Olivia felt her heart race at his words. "Alexander, But before she could finish, Alexander's cell phone rang. He looked at the handset, his expression changing instantly. "Sorry, I need to take this. It's the London office." As he walked away to take the call, Olivia stood there, feeling a confusing mix of emotions. There was something growing between her and Alexander, something that went beyond their initial agreement. But with so many complications, so many secrets and expectations, she didn't know if she had the courage to explore these feelings. When Alexander returned, there was a tension in his face that hadn't been there before. "Sorry about that," he said, sitting down again. "Problems with one of our European partners." Olivia nodded, feeling that the moment they'd had earlier had passed. "Is everything all right?" Alexander forced a smile. "Nothing you need to worry about. Let's concentrate on celebrating your success today, shall we?" They continued their dinner, the conversation flowing easily between personal and professional topics. But Olivia couldn't help noticing the shadow that seemed to have settled in Alexander's eyes. As they drove home that evening, Olivia found herself thinking about the future. The educational project was ready to take off. Her relationship with Alexander was evolving in unexpected ways, and there was still the 1-year deadline hanging over their heads. What would happen when the year was up? Olivia realized with a jolt that she didn't want this arrangement to come to an end. But did Alexander feel the same way? With so many unanswered questions and unexplored feelings, Olivia knew that the next few months would be crucial, not just for the success of the project, but for the future of her relationship with Alexander, whatever that relationship might become. As the cab snaked through the brightly lit streets of Manhattan, Olivia looked at Alexander, his profile jagged against the city lights. She made a silent promise to herself. Whatever happened, she would face the challenges and discoveries to come with courage and honesty. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Olivia was eager to see what it held. The New York sky was filled with dark clouds, foreshadowing a storm. Olivia looked out of the window of her office at the Blackwell Foundation, watching the first drops of rain fall. The weather seemed to perfectly reflect her turbulent state of mind. 3 months had passed since the approval of the educational project, and things were progressing rapidly. The first community center in Bridgeport was about to open, and Olivia felt a mixture of pride and anxiety at the thought of the event taking place in a few days. But it wasn't just work that occupied her thoughts. Her relationship with Alexander had become increasingly complex. They spent a lot of time together, both at and away from work, and Olivia couldn't deny that her feelings for him were deepening. However, the shadow of the original agreement and the 1-year deadline still hung over them, a constant reminder of the artificial nature of their marriage. Thunder rumbled in the distance, making Olivia jump slightly. She turned to her desk, refocusing on the preparations for the opening. It was then that she noticed an elegant envelope that hadn't been there before. Curious, she opened it. It was an invitation to a charity gala ball, organized by one of New York's most influential families. Olivia's name was handwritten on it, along with a personal note. "Dear Olivia, it would be an honor to have you at our annual ball. Alexander always attended alone. I can't wait to meet the woman who has finally captured his heart. Cordially, Victoria Huntington." Olivia felt a knot forming in her stomach. Victoria Huntington was known not only for her philanthropy, but also for her sharp tongue and talent for uncovering secrets. The thought of facing her scrutiny was intimidating. At that moment, Alexander entered the office, looking worried. "Olivia, we need to talk." She raised her eyes, immediately alert. "What happened?" Alexander hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I got a call from our contact in Bridgeport. There seems to be growing opposition to our project there. A local group is spreading rumors that we're trying to gentrify the neighborhood." Olivia felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "But that's ridiculous. We're trying to help the community, not drive it out." "I know," Alexander said, sitting down heavily in the chair opposite her desk. "But perception is important. We need to deal with it before it becomes a bigger problem." Olivia nodded, her mind already working on solutions. "I'm going to Bridgeport tomorrow. I need to talk to people, understand their concerns." Alexander frowned. "Are you sure? The opening is in a few days. Maybe we should send someone from the public relations team." "No," Olivia said firmly. "It needs to be me. I grew up there. Alexander. They know me. They'll trust me more than some executive in a suit." Alexander watched her for a moment, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. "You never cease to amaze me, Olivia. All right, go, but please be careful." Olivia smiled, touched by his concern. "Always. Oh, and before I forget," she handed him the invitation. "Looks like we have a ball to attend when I get back." Alexander read the invitation, a slight smile curving his lips. "Ah, the infamous Huntington Ball. Victoria must be looking forward to meeting you." "Should I be worried?" Olivia asked, half joking, half serious. Alexander took her hand, a gesture that had become increasingly frequent between them. "You'll do fine. Just be yourself. It's more than enough." The warmth of his hand and the sincerity in his eyes made Olivia's heart race. For a moment, she wanted to lean in and kiss him, to let go of all the complications and simply surrender to what she was feeling. But the sound of another clap of thunder brought her back to reality. "I should go," she said softly, reluctant to break the moment. "I have a bag to pack and a train to catch." Alexander nodded, slowly releasing her hand. "Call me when you get there, okay? And if you need anything." "I know," Olivia smiled. "You'll only be a phone call away." The next morning, Olivia was back in Bridgeport. The city seemed at once familiar and strange, as if she were seeing everything through a new lens. She spent the day meeting with community leaders, visiting old neighbors and trying to understand the source of the opposition to the project. It was during a heated conversation in a local cafe that Olivia finally understood the crux of the problem. People were afraid of losing their homes, their jobs, their community. The Blackwell Foundation's project, however well-intentioned, represented change, and change was scary. That night, exhausted but determined, Olivia called Alexander. "I think I understand what's going on here," she said as soon as he picked up. "People are scared, Alexander. They need to know that we're on their side." "And how can we do that?" Alexander asked, his voice a mixture of concern and curiosity. Olivia took a deep breath. "I have an idea, but it's a bit unconventional." She explained her plan. Instead of a formal opening ceremony, they would organize a community festival. They would invite local artists, have food stalls from neighborhood restaurants, and, most importantly, give people the chance to see exactly how the community center would work. "It's risky," Alexander admitted after listening. "But I think it could work. You really understand these people, Olivia." "I'm one of them," she replied softly. "Or at least, I was." There was a moment of silence on the line before Alexander spoke again. "I miss you," he said, his voice low and intimate. Olivia's heart leapt. "I miss you too," she replied, surprised at her own honesty. "Come home soon," Alexander said, and Olivia could hear the smile in his voice. Home. The word resonated in her mind long after they had hung up. When had New York, the apartment she shared with Alexander, become home? The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Olivia worked tirelessly, coordinating with the team in New York and the local leaders in Bridgeport to turn the formal opening into a vibrant and welcoming festival. When the big day arrived, the community center was unrecognizable. Colorful flags fluttered in the wind, the aroma of homemade food filled the air, and the sound of local music echoed through the streets. People arrived in groups, initially cautious, but soon becoming infected by the festive atmosphere. Olivia was in the middle of it all, greeting old friends, explaining the programs the center would offer, and making sure everything went smoothly. It was in the midst of this commotion that she spotted him, Alexander, standing at the entrance to the center, looking around with an expression of admiration. She approached him, a broad smile on her face. "You came." Alexander turned to her, his eyes shining. "I couldn't miss it. Olivia, this is incredible. You're incredible." Before she could reply, they were interrupted by an elderly lady who Olivia recognized as her old neighbor. "Olivia Mason, look at you," the lady exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "All elegant and married to a rich man. But you still remember your old friends, huh?" Olivia laughed, returning the hug. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how could I forget? Let me introduce you to my husband, Alexander." Mrs. Rodriguez looked Alexander up and down, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Ah, so this is the lucky man who stole our Olivia. I hope you know what a treasure you have in your hands, young man." Alexander smiled, charming as ever. "Believe me, Mrs. Rodriguez, I know exactly how lucky I am." The party continued well into the night, with Olivia and Alexander circulating together, talking to people, listening to their stories and concerns. As the evening progressed, Olivia could feel the atmosphere changing. Expressions of skepticism were replaced by smiles and looks of hope. When they finally had a moment alone, Alexander pulled Olivia into a quiet corner. "You did it, Olivia. You really did it." She smiled, exhausted but happy. "We did it, Alexander. It wouldn't have been possible without your support." He looked at her intensely, something changing in his eyes. "Olivia, But before he could finish, they were interrupted by a group of children asking to take photos. The moment passed, but Olivia could sense that something had changed between them. Hours later, when they finally returned to the hotel, Olivia was exhausted but exhilarated. The festival had been a resounding success, and she could feel that they had turned the tide of public opinion. "I think we deserve a celebration," Alexander said, taking a bottle of champagne from the room's small fridge. Olivia smiled, accepting the glass he offered her. "To the Bridgeport community," she toasted, "and to the incredible woman who made it all possible," Alexander added, his eyes fixed on her. They drank in silence for a moment, the atmosphere between them charged with something unspoken. Finally, Alexander set his glass aside and approached her. "Olivia," he began, his voice low and intense, "I need to tell you something." Her heart raced. "What is it?" He hesitated, seeming to struggle with the words. "I think I'm falling in love with you." "Really?" Olivia felt the world stop. She looked at Alexander, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, the sincerity in his expression. "Alexander, she began, but was interrupted by the shrill sound of her cell phone. Frustrated, she answered it, only to hear Vivian's frantic voice on the other end. "Olivia, thank God I found you. We have a problem. A big problem." "What happened?" Olivia asked, feeling her stomach sink. "It's about your wedding," Vivian said, her voice tense. "Someone found out. The story's about to break in the press." Olivia looked at Alexander, fear etched on her face. The moment of happiness they had shared seconds before seemed to have been swept away by a tsunami of reality. The storm they had been dreading had finally arrived, and now they would have to face it together. The flight back to New York was tense and silent. Olivia stared out of the window of Alexander's private plane, watching the clouds pass by, her stomach a knot of anxiety. Next to her, Alexander was working furiously on his laptop, making sotto voce calls and sending urgent emails. Vivian's revelation about the imminent exposure of their marriage of convenience had gone off like a bombshell, ruining what should have been a moment of triumph and possibly a turning point in their relationship. When the plane landed, a limousine was waiting for them on the tarmac. Inside the vehicle, Vivian was waiting for them, her face a mask of professional concern. "The situation is worse than we thought," she said as soon as the doors closed. "The story is scheduled to air tomorrow morning on all the major news outlets. We have less than 12 hours to formulate a strategy." Alexander nodded, his expression grim. "Who leaked the information?" Vivian hesitated, casting a quick glance at Olivia before answering. "We believe it was someone from Bridgeport, possibly someone who knew Olivia before the wedding." Olivia felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. The idea that someone from her old community could have betrayed her trust was painful. "What exactly do they know?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling. "Apparently, they have details about the initial agreement, including the one-year term and the financial compensation involved," Vivian replied, avoiding looking directly at Olivia. The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia could feel the weight of Alexander's gaze on her, but she couldn't face him. The whole situation seemed surreal, as if she were trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. "What's the plan?" Alexander finally asked, his voice controlled, but Olivia could detect a note of underlying tension. Vivian sighed. "We have a few options. We can try to deny everything, but with the evidence they seem to have, that could be risky. Another option is to try and hush up the story, but that could look even more suspicious." What if we told the truth?" Olivia suggested softly, surprising both herself and the others. Alexander turned to her, his eyes wide. "What?" Olivia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Think about it. If we try to deny it or cover it up, we'll look dishonest. But what if we tell our story on our own terms? Yes, it started out as an agreement, but things have changed." She looked directly at Alexander as she said this, remembering her near confession at the hotel. He stared back at her, a mixture of emotions flashing across his face. Vivian looked skeptical. "It's a risky move. The public reaction could be brutal. But it could also be our best chance of controlling the narrative," Alexander said slowly, still looking at Olivia. "If we're honest and vulnerable, maybe people will understand and even sympathize." Vivian looked from one to the other, clearly surprised at the direction the conversation was taking. "Well, if you're sure, we can arrange an exclusive interview for tomorrow morning, before the original story airs. I have contacts at GMA who could make it happen." Alexander nodded. "You do that, Vivian. But first, Olivia and I need to talk. In private." As soon as they arrived at the apartment, Alexander led Olivia into the office, closing the door behind them. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the air heavy with everything that needed to be said. "Olivia," Alexander began, his voice soft, "before we decide anything, we need to be completely honest with each other. What I said at the hotel in Bridgeport, I meant every word." Olivia's heart raced. "Alexander, Please let me finish," he interrupted gently. "When I proposed this deal to you, I never imagined I'd feel this way. You've changed my life, Olivia. Not just our work at the foundation, but you. Your strength, your compassion, your integrity. I fell in love with you, and that scares me more than any media scandal." Tears began to form in Olivia's eyes. "Oh, Alexander," she whispered, taking a step towards him. "I fell in love with you too. I tried to fight it, tried to convince myself that it was just part of the deal, but it's real. It's the most real thing I've ever felt." Alexander pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. For a long moment, they just stayed like that, absorbing the truth of their feelings and the comfort of each other's closeness. Finally, Alexander pulled away slightly, holding Olivia's face between his hands. "So, what do we do now?" Olivia took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. "I think we do exactly what I suggested. We tell our story. The real story." Alexander nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "Together?" "Together," Olivia confirmed, feeling stronger than ever. The next few hours were a race against time. Vivian worked tirelessly to organize the interview, while Olivia and Alexander prepared, discussing what they would say and how they would approach the difficult questions that were sure to come. The next morning, they were sitting side by side on the set of Good Morning America, facing the cameras and an interviewer with a determined look on her face. "So, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell," the interviewer began, "there are rumors circulating about the nature of your marriage. Would you like to set the record straight?" Olivia looked at Alexander, who shook her hand reassuringly. She turned to the interviewer and, in a clear, firm voice, began, "The truth is that our marriage began as an arrangement. I was desperate to save the life of my mother, who needed expensive surgery, and Alexander needed to get married to fulfill a clause in his inheritance contract. It was a decision made in extreme circumstances." Alexander continued, "But what began as a business arrangement turned into something much deeper and more meaningful. Working together at the Blackwell Foundation, seeing Olivia's passion and dedication, I found myself falling in love with her." The interviewer seemed genuinely surprised by her frankness. "What about you, Olivia? Have your feelings changed too?" Olivia smiled, looking at Alexander. "Completely. Alexander isn't the cold, calculating man I initially thought he was. He's compassionate, dedicated, and has a huge heart. Our work together at the foundation, especially the project in Bridgeport, has shown me what an incredible man he really is." The interview continued, with Olivia and Alexander answering questions about their relationship, their work at the foundation, and their plans for the future. They were honest about the challenges they faced and the doubts they had, but also about how their love grew organically through their shared experiences. When the interview ended, there was a palpable sense of relief in the air. They had told their truth, for better or worse. Back in the car, Vivian met them, her face a mixture of admiration and concern. "You were incredible in there. Authentic. Vulnerable. I think it may have worked, but we'll still have to deal with the public's reaction." Alexander nodded, pulling Olivia close. "We'll deal with it together, whatever the outcome." In the hours and days that followed, Olivia and Alexander's story dominated the headlines. As expected, there was criticism and skepticism, but also a surprising outpouring of support. Many people were touched by the couple's honesty and the genuine transformation of their relationship. The project in Bridgeport, far from being damaged by the scandal, gained even more attention and support. People saw Olivia's dedication to her home community as proof of her integrity. A week after the bombshell interview, Olivia and Alexander were back in Bridgeport for the official opening of the community center. The event drew a much larger crowd than expected, with people coming not only to see the center, but to express their support for the couple. As they cut the ribbon together, Olivia looked at Alexander, seeing the love and pride in his eyes. They had weathered the storm together and come out stronger on the other side. That evening, back at the apartment in New York, Alexander surprised Olivia with a candlelit dinner on the balcony. "To celebrate," he said, raising his glass. "Not just the success of the center, but us. Our honesty, our courage, our love." Olivia smiled, feeling truly happy for the first time in a long time. "Us," she agreed, toasting with him. As they watched the city lights, Olivia reflected on the incredible journey they had been on. From a cold business arrangement to true, deep love. From secrets and lies to honesty and vulnerability. The future was still uncertain, with many challenges ahead. But now, with Alexander by her side and the truth as her foundation, Olivia felt ready to face anything that came her way. Their marriage of convenience had transformed into something much more powerful, a partnership based on love, mutual respect, and a shared desire to make a difference in the world. And that, Olivia realized, was the greatest gift of all. The fall sun bathed Central Park in shades of gold and red as Olivia walked hand in hand with Alexander. It was hard to believe that a whole year had passed since that fateful night when she had accepted a deal that would change her life forever. They stopped by the lake, watching the ducks swim lazily in the water. Alexander turned to Olivia, his eyes shining with a mixture of love and nervousness. "You know what day it is, don't you?" he asked softly. Olivia nodded, feeling her heart race. "The anniversary of our agreement. The day our contract officially ends." Alexander took a deep breath, taking both of Olivia's hands in his. "Olivia, this past year has been the most extraordinary of my life. When I proposed that deal to you, I never imagined that I would find not just a partner, but the love of my life." Tears began to form in Olivia's eyes as she listened, overcome with emotion. "Our marriage may have started out as a business arrangement," Alexander continued, "but it has become the most real and precious thing I have ever experienced. And now, on the day we were supposed to part, I can only think of one thing." To Olivia's surprise, Alexander knelt down in front of her, taking a small velvet box out of his pocket. "Olivia Mason Blackwell, would you do me the honor of marrying me? Not for a contract, not for a year, but for life." Olivia gasped, tears streaming freely down her face now. "Oh, Alexander, yes, 1,000 times yes." Alexander slid the ring onto her finger, a beautiful diamond solitaire, much more personal and meaningful than the simple ring she had worn for the last year. He stood up and pulled her into a passionate kiss, as passers-by cheered and whistled around them. When they finally parted, both laughing and crying with joy, Olivia noticed a family group approaching. Her mother, Ellen, was there, accompanied by Vivian and some of her closest friends from Bridgeport. "You all knew about this?" Olivia asked, surprised and thrilled. Ellen smiled, hugging her daughter. "Of course we did, dear. Alexander told us about his plans weeks ago. He wanted to make sure we'd all be here to celebrate with you." The next few hours were a whirlwind of hugs, congratulations, and excited planning. They moved to a nearby restaurant, where Alexander had booked a private room for the celebration. As everyone chatted and celebrated around them, Olivia found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her there. From a desperate waitress in Bridgeport to a respected philanthropist in New York. From a marriage of convenience to a true and deep love. Alexander moved closer, enfolding her in his arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Olivia smiled, leaning against him. "About how unpredictable life is, and wonderful." He kissed her forehead affectionately. "And this is just the beginning, my love. We have a lifetime ahead of us." At that moment, Vivian approached them, her face serious, but with a glint of excitement in her eyes. "Sorry to interrupt, but I have some news that can't wait." Alexander and Olivia straightened up, immediately alert. "What happened, Vivian?" Alexander asked. "I just got a call from the New York Humanitarian Award Committee," Vivian announced, a smile spreading across her face. "Bridgeport's project has been selected as this year's winner. They are particularly impressed with the innovative approach and the measurable impact on the community." Olivia gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, "Oh my God, this is incredible!" Alexander hugged her tightly, his face beaming with pride. "You deserve this, Olivia. It was your vision, your passion that made all this possible." Vivian sniffled, still not finished. "There's more. The Ford Foundation got in touch. They're interested in partnering to expand the Bridgeport project model to other communities across the country." Olivia's jaw dropped. The idea that her project could impact not only her hometown, but communities across the country was overwhelming. Wow, she stammered, feeling a little dizzy at the magnitude of the news. Alexander held her tightly, his face serious but full of love. "You're ready for this, Olivia. We're ready for this. Together." Olivia looked around the room, at the smiling faces of her friends and family, at Vivian, who had become a friend and mentor, and finally at Alexander, the man who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. "Yes," she said, feeling a wave of determination and hope fill her. "We're ready." The rest of the evening passed in a celebratory haze, with everyone toasting not only Olivia and Alexander's engagement, but also the success of the project and the new opportunities opening up before them. Later, when they were finally alone in their apartment, Olivia and Alexander went out onto the balcony, watching the lights of the city they now truly considered their home. "So, Mrs. Blackwell," Alexander said, pulling her close, "how does it feel to know that you are now officially, truly, my wife by choice?" Olivia smiled, leaning in to kiss him softly. "I feel as if everything is finally in the right place. Like all the struggle, all the doubts, all the challenges have brought us exactly where we should be." Alexander nodded, his eyes shining with emotion. "You know, when I made that crazy proposal to you a year ago, I was so focused on what I needed, on what I could win. I never imagined I'd be earning so much more than a wife to satisfy an inheritance clause." "And what did you win?" Olivia asked softly, although she already knew the answer in her heart. "I've gained a partner, an inspiration, a love I never thought possible," Alexander replied, his voice full of emotion. "I've gained a new perspective on what really matters in life, and I've gained the chance to make a real difference in the world, thanks to your vision and passion." Olivia felt tears of happiness forming in her eyes again. "Oh, Alexander, I've gained so much too. You've given me not just financial security or social status, but the opportunity to grow, to challenge myself, to make a difference in a way I never thought possible." They were silent for a moment, just enjoying each other's presence and the view of the city that never sleeps. "So, what's next?" Olivia finally asked, a smile playing on her lips. Alexander laughed softly. "Well, we have a wedding to plan, an award to receive, a national project to launch. I guess you could say we have a lot of work ahead of us, Mrs. Blackwell." Olivia smiled, feeling happier and more fulfilled than she had ever imagined possible. "I can't wait." As they kissed under the New York stars, Olivia knew that this was just the first page of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter full of love, purpose, and the promise to make the world a better place, together. The agreement that had begun as a cold business contract had blossomed into something beautiful and transformative. And now, with a ring on their finger that represented true choice and genuine love, Olivia and Alexander were ready to face any challenge the future might bring, because now they knew that, together, they were capable of anything.